All right. What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lassercast, where we discuss horror movies and horror streaming shows. I am here in my garage about to talk about the Omen franchise, which I just realized I fucking really love. And over there in his car, where he spends a lot of his recordings, is my good friend Dr. Zayas God. What's up, Danny?
Just living the life. I'm just outside of Philadelphia in South Jersey for WrestleMania weekend. And I just finished binging through the entire Omen franchise. You can go on our channel now. It is littered with 45 to 60-second reviews of, I think, every Omen movie but the original, because we have talked about that. We have a video from a couple of years ago. We covered the unholy trinity of Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, and The Omen. But if you want to just get 45 to 60-second quick takes on Damien, The Omen 2, The Final Conflict, Omen 4, The Awakening, the 2006 remake, and of course the first Omen, we have all that up on the channel, and it inspired us to kind of have this Sunday morning Omen discussion.
Yes, exactly. I'm really excited to talk about this. I watched the Omen 2, which is or Damien Omen 2, and then the Omen 3, which is the Final Conflict starring Sam Neill. It's funny because we have like his face behind us. We just basically see his forehead and his chin. Then we have the actor that played Damien in the second one. We're going to review both of those movies today. But I figured we could take it back to the source, the Omen from 1976. And, I was thinking about it. I did a little research just to make sure I was fresh for this discussion. And I was like, oh, that's right. The first one is directed by Richard Donner,
Richard Donner, who that man got around genres like very few others. That man, in about a 10-year period, did the scariest horror movie that I've ever seen, probably at the time, and to some people maybe still the greatest superhero movie of all time, and then did the fucking Goonies.
Yeah.
And nobody gives Richard Donner the credit that I think he deserves. He passed away, I think, a few years back. And I really hope he's like a director who, his prime was at the time of like Spielberg's prime and, blockbuster movies, which he was part of with Superman. His legend, I think, kind of grows because of like everything that happened with Superman 2, and the Donner cut of that movie.
Right.
But I mean, if you go even a little bit more, he directed Lethal Weapon. So it's like, we're going from horror to blockbuster superhero movie to family friendly action adventure to like dude bros in the theater action movie. The guy could get around a genre. And the Omen 1976, I've said it enough. It is the movie that most terrified me as a kid. I think if I was ranking my list of the scariest movies to me, it would still be in the top 2 or 3, maybe still number 1.
Yeah.
And we covered The Exorcist. We did like Exorcist month a few I think in 2023.
Yeah.
And we watched the Exorcist show, which was really good. And we talked about Exorcist 3, which we both love. But one thing that I will give the Omen, the original, and this franchise, having just rewatched all of them,
right,
there is no Exorcist 2, The Heretic in the Omen franchise. There is no Exorcist Believer where you're just like, oh, really? This is what we're doing? There's no movie like that. The movies that we're going to be talking about today, especially the parts 2 and 3, I think are pretty good and hold up even to today.
Yes.
The remake doesn't do enough to stand out, but
right.
good for a remake. Uh, and the first Omen, man, I can't wait for you to see it because it is really fucking good.
Yeah, after binging these movies, I was really jealous that I didn't get a chance to see this yet, the new one. Today, when we go through these, we're really gonna focus on Damien, Omen 2, and then the Omen 3, the final conflict. We're really gonna focus on those two. At the very end of the video, we're gonna rank Danny's gonna rank every single movie in the Omen franchise, and then I'm just gonna rank the original trilogy and the remake. So we have our work cut out for us. Taking it back to Richard Donner. With Richard Donner, I actually just covered the original the Superman the movie from 1978. I covered that with Mike Bongiorno on his podcast, Pop Culture Man Children. So if you guys like the sound of my voice or my commentary here, you can always go check that out. It's actually a really fun discussion. But with the original Omen, just one thing I want to say to kind of tie it into these sequels is there really isn't a through line of like it's the same director or it's like the same screenwriters from every single movie. It's not even the same actor playing Damien in any of these movies.
There is
But
there's one producer, I think.
right, right, right. I was going to say that, and then the other thing I was going to say is Jerry Goldsmith's score, which is very, very important for this
Jerry
franchise.
Goldsmith's Oscar-winning score.
Exactly.
Abe Satani, the music that gave me fucking nightmares when I was about 9 years old,
Right.
won the Oscar for,
right.
I think it's Best Original Song. I think he composed that song. And that's, could you imagine like oh, Damien, that fucking won an Oscar. And that score, Jerry Goldsmith, forever will live in my nightmares because of that fucking music. And it goes so perfectly with this movie, the original film, and with the franchise.
Yep.
It's as unique a piece of music to a horror movie as Tubular Bells is to The Exorcist, or Bernard Herrmann's score is to Psycho.
Yeah. That's really, really great point. I agree. And you mentioned before that there was like this one producer or whatever that kind of tied everything together. It's another Bernard. The guy's name is Harvey Bernard. He's the producer that he was talking to his friend, and he had the idea about a movie about the Antichrist. That's what started this whole thing, right? And so he gave the idea to a guy named David Seltzer, and he's the one that wrote the screenplay for The Omen, and it took a whole year for him to flesh it out. I think we mentioned this in our discussion of The Omen when we did it 2 years ago, that Richard Donner wanted to make things ambiguous. He wanted to make it to where you didn't know if this was a series of coincidences that all these people were dying versus like, oh, they're getting killed by the devil's power. But talking about things that are consistent throughout these movies, the thing about The Omen is that unlike even Rosemary's Baby, where we get like a little glimpse of like the devil sort of at the end, and especially unlike The Exorcist, where we see full-on demonic images and also like a girl being possessed with supernatural powers, this movie, this series it's very much like Final Destination, where you know that someone's going to die because they start playing that music that Danny was just talking about, and then you see whatever the thing is that's going to kill them, kind of like you focus in on it. Usually there's like a crow or a dog that shows up, a Rottweiler, and you're like, oh, that person's going to fucking die right there. And it's like scary, and the kills in this franchise I think are very epic. I think that good.
It's not a franchise. First of all, the fact that we're saying franchise, because I don't think enough people even give this credit for being a franchise. Yeah. I think Damien, Omen 2 and the final conflict are so under the radar. Yes, I'm really glad that the shorts that I did have kind of picked up some steam. They've gotten a couple hundred views. And if you guys like those, like leave some comments and like share them around, because like people, The Exorcist, and again, it's so easy to compare Omen to The Exorcist. similar topics, similar time periods. Like the Exorcist 2 came out in 77, Damien came out in 78. And then the Final Conflict came out in 81.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all happening in like the same time period.
Yeah.
And they just kind of, this franchise kind of fell under the radar.
Yeah.
And what I, and what's weird is that, like, I'm glad you brought up Final Destination, because people watch those movies for the Rube Goldberg death traps.
Right.
But this is kind of where that started. You made so that's a really great point, because it's like, I'm thinking of like the very first Final Destination, where like the kid's in the bathroom and the water is dripping down and getting closer to his feet, and he slips on the water, and he like falls forward, and he gets his neck to, it's all this like crazy stuff that has to happen for him to die. But
Right.
then you think about Jennings, the photographer, David Warner in the first movie. Like, the knives have to get thrown into a spot where he has to bend over to pick them up. The brakes on the truck have to get hit. The truck has to roll down a ramp. Just so happens to have a pane of glass in the back seat. It has to, like, the truck doesn't just hit him. The truck stops. The sheet of glass has to fly off. It's like, it is very Final Destination-ish. But, one thing is, it ties back to the title of the movie. The whole idea that these, which really, the franchise doesn't really continue. That the fact that the movie is called The Omen, the original, has to do with the photographer and the photographs showing kind of like what's going to happen. Like, what is this thing that looks like it's going around the nanny's neck? What is this thing that is touching the priest? Why is there a line going across my fucking neck? And then of course these things happen.
Yeah.
The franchise kind of forgets about that. Like, they bring that back obviously in the remake. But I do love that part of it. And as you go through this movie, and in the movies that we're going to talk about, there are some great kills. And I can't wait for you to see First Omen, because there is some graphic shit in that movie too.
Nice. Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up the photos and all those weird like shadows and stuff that are in the photos in the first one. You're right. Like, that is what this franchise is named after, but really it's like much more focused on Damien. What's cool about this franchise, and we can start going into Damien Omen 2 now, is that there are certain things that are in every movie that are consistent. There is Damien's little birthmark on the top of his head, the 666. Those are in at least the original trilogy, right? Then you have those daggers that you mentioned already before, the daggers of Megiddo, which play a part in the plot in the all three of the original trilogy.
Yeah.
As
They
far
even got the actor who played Bugenhagen in the original movie is the only actor from the original movie to be back in part 2.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, most of the main characters, aside from Damien, die off. So
Right. Yeah. And so and then finally, just bringing it back to omens, though, I would say there are omens in the third movie. But the interesting thing about the third movie is it's like, oh, well, we had the Antichrist. Now we're talking about the literal Christ coming back to fight Damien. So there are omens about like Jesus's return, or as in the Omen 3, it's where he calls him Nazarene. Show yourself. I can't wait to talk about that one with Sam fucking Neill. But let's talk about Omen 2. Damien Omen 2. Damien Omen 2 takes place 7 years after the original. It's interesting because they always talk about how much Damien ages, and they talk about Damien's age in each of these movies, but they never say like a specific date. They're never like, oh, it's 1995. They never do that. But there's only 2 years between the first Omen movie and the second one, but Damien has aged 7 years between the first two. So it's like it is kind of a science fiction movie because it is taking place in the future. In all of these movies, there is like some advanced technology, like they use advanced technology to kind of like look at Damien's DNA. In the second one, there's this like prediction of three suns lining up or three stars lining up in the third one, and I think that that's supposed to be considered like advanced computer technology then too. But if the second one took place 7 years after the first movie, I think Danny's looking at the sky over there, then
I
the
got the sun
second
coming in.
Oh, nice. The second one, if it took place like 7 years after the first one, then it would be like 1982 or so, right? Or 83. Then the Final Conflict one would be like 2003 if we were going with the
because
ages.
I think they do mention that he's
33,
33. Yeah.
just like Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I really like how because Damien Omen 2, which I think we could just call it Omen 2.
Yeah, let's just do that. Yeah.
That way we're not confusing ourselves.
Right.
I like it because it feels totally authentic to the original film. To the point where and this is not even like it, the fact that they got William Holden and Lee Grant to play Damien's new parents, essentially, his Robert Thorne's brother, Richard Thorne. But they basically went from one Oscar-winning actor, maybe my favorite, like old-time actor, Gregory Peck, to another great classic actor in William Holden.
Yeah.
It automatically legitimizes the movie right off the bat. Like it makes you feel like this is a movie worth your time. Like, oh shit, that's William Holden. Like, this is the guy from Sabrina, I think Sunset Boulevard, like Stalag 17, like he Network, which I think was around that same time. I think he had just come off an Oscar.
Okay.
That was 76. So he had just come off either getting nominated for or because Peter Finch won the Oscar for Network and he had died. I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yeah.
So he had just come off of Network just a year or two before. So you have like this classic Hollywood actor stepping into the shoes of Gregory Peck. And it's like, okay, this is like a big time sequel. And, Lee Grant had also won an Oscar earlier in her career. So it's like the two main adults in this movie are awesome. You have a young Lance Henriksen as one of the apostles, which I read on IMDb. He was not very happy with his role in the movie because apparently there was a director change midway through the movie and he had a much better relationship with the first director.
Yeah. The as far as directors go, the people that wrote the screenplays for the second one, they're listed as, let's see, Mike Hodges. That's the guy that was the original director, and then Don Taylor. Right. Don Taylor is the one that ended up directing it. The two original screenwriters were Stanley Mann and Mike Hodges, but Mike Hodges was the one that was going to direct it. I don't know why they flipped him like that, but they did.
We want the Hodges cut. Oh wait, no, wrong director, wrong movie.
But I could see something like that. Yeah, I guess that maybe Lance Henriksen's role kind of got affected by that because when they show Lance Henriksen in the Omen 2, he seems like he's going to play like a significant part in the movie, and he's really just kind of like in the background for the majority of it.
You kind of feel like he's being set up to be the Mrs. Baylock of this movie,
right?
Like Damien's protector at this like military school for kids, and he has like a few scenes. I think he's on screen with Damien once throughout the movie,
right?
And he's basically just like, I'm here to protect you,
right?
We have to get off LV 426, Damien.
Right. Yeah. I think that like you know, if it was any other actor, we probably wouldn't really care, or we wouldn't even be noticing him. But it's Lance Henriksen, which I think we both
Yes.
love very much. You know, you mentioned the cast. I was kind of shocked to see the friggin' woman from Beetlejuice who plays Aunt Marion in this.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. I first of all, that woman looked the same for like the last 20 years of her life, apparently, because yeah.
Right. She's in Beetlejuice. She's in Mars Attacks. You know, so she's in a couple of different
Yeah,
things with
Mars
Tim Burton.
Attacks came out in like 96. So that's almost 20 years after this, and she looks exactly the same.
Yeah, yeah. My mom, because I started watching the second Omen while I was at my mom's house, and she was saying that she kind of was a famous actress that had been in a bunch of things too. I only just know her from Tim Burton movies, but she's great in this. She goes to warn you know, Damien's new parents about Damien's threat, and she wants Damien to be kept away from his you know, stepbrother or his whatever you call it, like his adoptive brother. And then she is the first victim that we see. There's a crow that's very significant in this second one. And that kind of was giving me opera flashbacks, Danny, too, just seeing a crow flying around. Um, so she has a heart attack after she sees this crow at night. She's discovered by Damien's adoptive mother, and that kind of gets the ball rolling. A crow, because you were talking about epic kills a couple of minutes ago, is the like it actually is active in the death of the second person, which is a reporter that once again goes to warn Damien's adoptive father. You know, it's funny because I really like this franchise, but you can still really like a franchise and it can kind of have flaws or things that you laugh at. One of the things that I laugh about in this franchise is like how much the main characters are warned about Damien and how much they kind of shrug it off as like coincidence, even though like 15 people connected to Damien just die like a
I can't
weird.
believe all 6 of the people that told me my son was the Antichrist died mysteriously. What are the chances?
Exactly, exactly.
My
This woman comes up to, you know, it's Robert Thorne is the second one.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
Robert Thorne is Gregory Peck,
Gregory
and I
Peck is
think
Robert Thorne.
William Holden is Richard Thorne.
Richard Thorne. Right, right. So Richard Thorne gets warned by this reporter woman, and I think her name's like Joan Hart, which is kind of funny. And
Yeah,
then she's like on this desolate road, and she stops her car and she sees this crow. The crow pecks her eyes out, and then a giant Mack truck just comes, and you must have laughed, Annie, when she got hit by that truck. I'm guessing, right?
I that is that was pretty. I mean, it's a good kill, but yeah, her like body takes a very unnatural bounce off of the truck. But also, there's also a line that happens after that where they're like, "Yeah, hit by a truck alone on a road," and I'm like, "Yeah, it could happen to anybody." Like, what one thing that I will say, and I said this in my short review of Omen 2, is that this movie does what a lot of sequels do, and it hits you with the plot, and then it almost becomes a slasher movie,
Yes,
where
yes.
it's like here, and like you brought it up, it's like here's these people that are like lining up to tell the truth about Damien, or to bring this to their attention, and all of these people, like the doctor in the hospital, it's like, oh, that's a weird piece of medical knowledge about Damien, let me go tell his parents, and cut in half by a fucking elevator cable. Another amazing scene.
Yeah.
Poor Meshock Taylor, who would go on to be on, I think, Designing Women. I, uh, in his first screen role.
Yeah.
Then you have the guy who's Joan Hart's friend, who who finally convinces William Holden, come look at this painting that we excavated from Megiddo, where they found Bugenhagen's body,
Yes,
and
yes.
it's a painting of
This mural. It's that
it's this like mural from like biblical times of what they claim to be the Antichrist, and it basically is a painting of Damien.
Right.
And while William Holden's in the train, you basically get a similar death to what happened to the photographer in the first movie, just minus a decapitation. Like
Right.
breaks. Suddenly the train starts moving. It hits him, and it impales him, or like crushes him between two train cars.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the scientist's death, because you mentioned how the scene that you just described is very similar to the death of David Warner's character in the first movie. I really felt like the scientist's death was going to be like, this is the death for this movie. That's like that, because when he dies, it's so over the top with the elevator cable like flying down. Well, first of all, it's funny because the elevator goes all the way up, then it shoots all the way down. And you're like, okay, well, it's gonna smash, and then his body's gonna be like turned into tomato paste, right? But then it like stops, and he's kind of like, "Oh, I'm okay," right? But then the fucking cable comes down and just cuts him in half. And I think the reason why they wanted it to be like the David Warner death is because like they show that cable going through him like 3 different times. With the David Warner death, they show it like 6 different times when his head gets chopped off. But it's one of those like, oh, you just see him get cut like 3 different times, and I fucking loved it. The other deaths is there's the one guy that drowns on their property. That's not as like gory or whatever, but it's cool like how they film this man being underwater and they're just like following him over the ice. I thought that was really cool. I was getting some like The Good Son vibes with this movie too.
Yeah.
Because he's got his brother in this movie too. That you're like, okay, when's he gonna kill the fucking brother in this one? Yeah, I mean, there's all these coincidences connected to Damien's death or Damien's ascendancy, right? All these people are dying. In this one, the brother's in charge of this corporation, and it's the idea that like Damien's gonna eventually take this corporation over. Politics are involved in this one too. Politics are involved in all three of them. But there's all these signs. I guess you could say that the Omen is that wall that's in this movie. Like if they're gonna keep the Omen title, it's that wall.
Yeah, and you bring up politics, and it's it goes back to that original poem that Father Brennan tells him. From the eternal sea he rises, and they always talk about how the eternal sea is politics. That it's like been translated to mean eternal battles of politics. And you made a joke in our like Twitter thread, our text thread, about how like it's really appropriate that we're covering these movies now.
Oh yes.
When we have let's see, we have an eclipse tomorrow, a solar eclipse tomorrow. I'm in New York. We just had a literal earthquake and then an aftershock on Friday.
Yeah.
We have an election coming up that is an eternal sea of torment coming. And we have you mentioned one of the candidates is out there selling Bibles.
Yes, one of the candidates who has like a cult-like following is selling Bibles that have parts of the Constitution and stuff in them.
We are very close. We are very close to Donald Trump standing in front of a group of his supporters going, "I want you to kill the Nazarene."
Right.
And a bunch of like red-hatted people going out to like kill babies. Okay, right. Apologies if you see the final conflict, you'll understand that joke is less about Trump and more about the movie. But yeah.
Yes, I'm actually super eager to talk about the Godfather-style baby massacre montage of the third Omen. We'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, there seems to be a lot of signs right now that, hey, this could be the Book of Revelations right now in real life. So one thing I want to touch upon before we finish talking about Omen 2 is the actor that plays Damien in this one, right? Because we have a different Damien every movie. The actor that plays Damien for this second one is Jonathan Scott Taylor. Now, he's British, and it's funny because one thing that did kind of stand out for this movie is that his accent's kind of weird. Like, obviously, he's trying not to be British, but he comes off as sort of like this, like, I don't know, kind of like foppish, kind of like he's like an aristocrat or something. He's like, Mark, don't go over there, Mark. You know, and it's just I don't know. What do you think of his accent and his acting in general?
I liked him
Yeah.
because he looked the part.
Oh yes.
And what I like about each of the films in the original franchise is you have different stages of Damien's life. You have obviously like toddler Damien, who is effectively just a kid who doesn't know what's going on and who is noticing things around him, a dog, a nanny. You know, why are the monkeys going crazy? I don't like that church. Get me away from it. You know, then you have this Damien where you can tell he's a lot more aware of things, but also not 100%. He's not like, I am the antichrist and Mark, you have to go do my bidding. He's like, he's kind of coming into his own. He has that one scene where they almost kind of hint that he has telekinetic powers.
Yes.
Where he gets angry at a kid for like bullying his cousin and his half brother, and he like carries him against the wall.
Yeah.
So you could tell he's aware that there's something going on, but he's not fully aware.
Right.
And then you have Sam Neill, who's just like, I'm the fucking Antichrist. And like, everybody better get ready for me to rise up and take over the fucking planet.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it really does make each movie better in that regard, in that it's like you have these very different portrayals of the same character at a different stage in their lives.
Yes. 1000% agree. And it's funny because like the acting, even though it's three different actors, it's like kind of consistent. The looks that he gives, you know, you're always like looking into Damien's eyes as he sort of like bewitches people, whether it's a little toddler or the, you know, puberty age Damien or the adult Damien. And then, you know, just his haircut and stuff is always the same. You know, there's always that sort of like that intensity where there's something going on under the surface where he's not really yelling. Like Sam Neill yells a little bit, this guy yells a little bit, but for the most part, it's like an iceberg where all the evil and stuff is underneath the surface, and we're only just getting the glimpse of it at the very top there. You know, and he doesn't really do over the top evil things. At one point, when he does kill his adoptive brother, he does try to persuade his brother to join him. And the brother, who has learned that he's the Antichrist, turns him down, and then essentially just causes him to have an aneurysm. That scene, I think, that might have been my favorite scene in the whole movie, because like Damien, you could see that Damien is really sad. He's upset that he has to kill his brother. Like he really did love his brother, you know?
Yeah. No, like I said, like the comparison that I used was for this movie. This movie to me, and it's funny because I think they came out in the same year. Yeah. This movie to me is Jaws 2.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is very simple. You have an original, you have a part one that is an all-time classic that can never be duplicated. So don't try to duplicate it. Just do more of what made the first one so good. Up the body count, show a lot, you know, be a little bit more graphic, and, you know, just kind of keep the ideas of the original. So, you know, obviously Jaws 2 was able to have Brody and, you know, Roy Scheider back in the movie, which was awesome. Even though he made that movie because he was contractually obligated to make it. But, you know, this movie keeps the main theme and idea. I love the score in this movie too. They don't just rehash the Abe Satani from part one. Like Jerry Goldsmith came back and wrote a new score, which I thought worked really well in this movie too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And like, yeah, it does up the body count, and it does get kind of a little ridiculous at some points where it's like, hey, can I talk to you about your son Damien? Yeah, but it, you know, it still worked for me, and I feel like it's an under. And again, you know, if we're gonna do a comparison to The Exorcist, my Lord in heaven, The Exorcist 2 came out a year before this and is one of the most universally scoffed at movies, like worst horror movies of all time. Like it's on every list.
Mm-hmm.
Worst sequels, worst movies in general.
Yeah.
You name it. Worst performances. And for this to come out a year after that and really just be tonally consistent and to the original, and I think, you know, add to the lore of the original, I think makes it, you know, a movie that more people should check out.
1000%. Yeah. And it's on Hulu right now. So you guys can go check out
Yeah.
this. I mean, you can check out all the sequels. Is the remake on Hulu too?
Every Omen movie outside, of course, of the first Omen is currently on Hulu. Yes.
That is awesome. Yeah. You can have a Hulu, an Omen binge right now. I actually got the third one on YouTube. And I like just so I could watch it with ease because you can't watch like Hulu and stuff while you're walking. And I was like walking yesterday morning watching Omen 3, and you know they do this fucking baby death montage, and I'm just like walking in my neighborhood. I'm like, oh
Let's
my
get to
god, what
that.
the
Let's
fuck am
get
I
to the
watching?
final conflict.
I'm ready. So we've already said it multiple times. Sam Neill is Damien, grown up by this movie. He's 33 years old. He's in charge of Thorn Industries, and he, through once again a Final Destination like murder, he gets to take on the role of the British ambassador. It's full circle. He's taken over his father's role. He was the ambassador to Britain in the first movie. Now he's the ambassador to Britain in this movie. The reason why Damien is doing that in this movie is because, according to the prophecies, Jesus is going to be reborn, and he's going to be reborn in Britain. Like whatever term they call it, like the Isle of, I don't know what the
The
fuck, like
Isle of
white,
Angels or the
something like
Angel
that.
Isle.
Right, England, yeah. And so he's there. He has this like second in command who, like, by coincidence has just had a baby right around the time where like this new baby Jesus is supposed to be born. And that's basically his mission for this movie, is to prevent Jesus from coming back. And I find it kind of funny having this conversation with you because you're a Jewish guy. I think both of us are basically like atheists, really, you know, at this point. And you know, we're
I'm
talking
not
about like,
religious at all.
yeah.
It's funny that I am maybe the least religious person that I know, and religious horror gets under my skin.
Yes,
And I think I hope this doesn't come across bad, but I think it at its core, because one of the things that scares me most in horror are cults and cult movies.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, especially in these movies, a lot of religion as portrayed in horror that makes it feel cultish and cult-like. And so the Omen, the Exorcist movies, you know, they tend to get under my skin a lot. And
Yeah. No, I understand. You know, yesterday I was telling you the thing I was taking, like, okay, there's the eclipse, there's the earthquake, there's Donald Trump selling his Bibles, there's all these things. And my mind started to do that kind of tinfoil hat conspiracy theory stuff where I was like, wait a minute, what if this is the book of Revelation? Is the rapture coming? And, you know, I was thinking all that stuff. When I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about this movie series, which I just sort of like binged right into my eyeballs for a couple of days straight, is that when you get to this point with religion where it becomes black and white, where it's like this conflict, it is this sort of, even though we're talking about like the end of the world, it makes life more simple because it comes down to, oh, everything that's happening is because of this war between God and the devil. It's like every little random thing in life you can explain because it just comes down to good versus evil. And I think that people can accept that stuff because it makes everything make sense. And it makes everything very simple where it's polarized, black and white. That's what this film series is, right? Especially with this third one, because all of a sudden we have this like new power to challenge Damien. In the first two movies, he's sort of like unstoppable, and it's like, okay, well, the Antichrist is coming, like everyone's fucked. But in this one, it's like, no, there actually is a chance. Go ahead. What are you gonna say?
Oh no. I wasn't gonna say anything. I was just leaning forward to move my seat up.
Oh, okay. Like I was just talking to one of my friends, his name's Ryan Bradley, and he wrote a book called Saint's Blood, which is about a cult abducting a guy that they believe to be a saint to drain him of his blood. And Ryan Bradley told me that he did not like the first Omen, not the first Omen movie, but the original Omen movie. He felt like it was just like Damien was too powerful and that, like, you know, you couldn't stop him. And, you know, that made it like just seem like, well, what's the point? And I think that the appeal of Omen 3 is that, whoa, they could actually stop Damien. And you get to see a nervous Damien portrayed by Sam Neill, like a Damien that is worried that his plan might fail. Because
Yeah.
go ahead.
Again, very like similar to Lance Henriksen. Apparently, Sam Neill did not like his performance in this movie.
Huh. Okay.
And I love Sam Neill. I think you do too. Sam
I
Neill,
do.
and I've said this before on our channel, Sam Neill is a like totally under the radar horror legend. Like the same year this movie came out, he does Possession. I mean, horror adjacent. Of course, he's Alan Grant in Jurassic Park, but then he comes back for Event Horizon. I mean, In the Mouth of Madness. Like, the guy's got horror cred like crazy. And he's got this awesome voice, especially when he was younger. And, you know, I think he's from New Zealand. So he's got like that kind of, you know, that New Zealand accent, which is like a twist on the British accent. And he's kind of trying to sound American too. And, you know, when he has these monologues where he's like talking to a statue of Christ in his like own little secret room in his home.
Yeah.
And he's like taunting the statue of Christ.
Yeah.
And I fucking love that. And
Yes.
it makes this movie like, this is a movie where I could totally see people watching this after parts 1 and 2 and being like, I don't know, this movie's weird. Like, it's a little boring, this and that, but I really like this movie. I think there is something really interesting about watching an adult Damien who is not just aware of who he is, but is like aware and like building a cult and, you know, preparing for the takeover. You know, he is preparing effectively to take over the world. Yes, through politics, but yes, he is coming to power and he is at the height of his power and fully aware of who he is and what he can do. And there's something really creepy about that. Like, because you think about the devils that you get to see in movies, right?
Yes.
They're usually these like really crazy over the top performances, right?
Right.
Viggo Mortensen in The Prophecy, Robert De Niro in Angel Heart, Al Pacino in The Devil's Advocate.
Right.
The Antichrist figure has always kind of been this like under the radar, like, and in this franchise, it's always like they don't know that they are the Antichrist. They're just a child born, and everyone around them, especially in the original movie, everyone around Damien is there to, the dog, Miss Baylock. They're there to protect, like the nanny who hangs herself. It's all for you. Like, why would she do that? Like, if you're this little kid watching, and to see that now as an adult, and you almost have the Antichrist getting to ham it up a little bit.
Oh, absolutely.
Sam Neill is just awesome. It bothers me that he didn't like his performance in this movie because I really think he's awesome in it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And actually, Danny, honestly, I did a short of Event Horizon a couple of years ago, and it's gotten a lot of views. I would love to cover Event Horizon in a discussion like this. I would love to cover In the Mouth of Madness since I've never seen it in this. I know. We've had this discussion before, but I want to just kind of play off your point that you just made there. What's interesting about this trilogy, especially this movie, is that the Antichrist is the inverse of Jesus, right? And very much like what happens to him is like the inverse of Jesus. He gives this speech that you just mentioned, which I kind of wanted to look up that speech and maybe even quote it a little bit in this, but I just didn't have time. And I felt a little weird looking it up online too. I was like, what list am I going to end up on looking up this speech? But the monologue he gives to that statue of Jesus is amazing because it is like the inverse of the Bible. Like Anton LaVey, he wrote the Satanic Bible, right?
Yeah.
And that the whole idea behind that is basically like, well, the Ten Commandments, those are like the things that we should be doing the opposite of because we're human, And I feel like that's a big influence on this movie. He talks about Jesus as if like, oh, it's this weakness to be like a follower of Jesus. Like like we're denying our human nature. Like it's never like, oh, the demons are gonna come up and they're gonna rip off people's faces, and then the devil's gonna come out and they shoot fire. It's not like that. It's like you could be this sort of complacent person that's denying their nature if you follow God and Jesus, but you could follow me and you could have this like paradise on earth. In a speech that he does, which like I think that the speech where he does the monologue with the Jesus statue is my favorite scene in this movie because it's just Sam Neill at top of his game. There's also this other sequence that is amazing where he lands in a helicopter, he walks around this like cliffside on this island, and there's just like thousands of people there. And I don't know like what they're implying is like the lighting, but there's basically like this flash of light that goes across the people. I don't know if it's from like the helicopter, if it's from like a lighthouse or something, but it's so effective because everyone is in shadow, and then it'll flash over their faces and you'll see like a little kid that's a follower of Damian. You'll see a priest who's a follower of Damian. There's a nurse, and it just like goes. I love that fucking scene.
And then the Godfather.
Yes.
Well, this is how non-religious a baptism scene. There you go. I was
yes.
drinking in water.
Yes. So yeah, speaking of baptisms, I've seen a couple of things that have like really jarred me to my soul. Like one thing that really bothers me about horror, but about real life is like when infants or like innocents are killed. That really bothers me. And I've seen like footage of people baptizing kids in a pretty violent way with a baby, and it just like fucking turns my stomach, In this, you don't really know what the priest does, but let's just set the sequence up. So basically, you have all of these male children that are killed by this cult, and it's all because they were born at the same time that this like Jesus baby would have been born. And we have this montage where you don't like outright see infants getting killed. The closest you get is a stroller gets hit by a car, right? But everything else is like off screen. But it's just like you kind of hear babies making noises. Like there's a baby that coughs at one point. There's a baby
when that stroller got hit, in the back of my head, I heard Keanu Reeves yelling at Sandra Bullock. It was cans.
Just cans.
Just cans.
Yeah. And and of course there's like sort of like Ghostbusters 2 flashbacks there with that too as well. Yeah, Danny, why don't you? I know I've talked a lot right now. Why don't you kind of talk about that sequence for a second because it just kind of blows my mind.
I mean, you set it up. It's these. It's just a montage of like setups for the killings of babies. Like you don't see, and I think like no movie. I don't want to say no movie because a Serbian film exists, but like a movie that is going to be released to a mainstream audience is not going to show babies being murdered on screen, but they do such a good job of like letting you know that these babies are being killed, that it does have like a deeply unsettling effect. There's one moment in this movie that really scares me, and it is when the Damien's like right hand assistant, he keeps swearing to Damian that his baby was actually born at like 11:55 p.m. So it wasn't after midnight, like
Right.
like March 23rd, not March 24th, I swear. And his wife is at home, and his wife like knows, and then is it the dog shows up and like trances her, and she's ironing, and she's like sees her baby as like this like burnt corpse, but then we see that it's still a baby, and she's walking towards like the little crib with a steaming iron, and
Yep.
and then she has this look on her face. The Omen franchise has so many moments like that. The Miss Baylock in the original movie,
Yeah.
when she is like creeping towards Lee Remick when she's in the hospital bed, and you can only see her like through the outline of the sheets, just the look on her face fucking scares me. And
Yep.
this woman creeps the hell out of me in this scene. And then
Yeah.
she kills her husband with the iron when he comes home. And then on top of that, you have these priests who all have Megiddo daggers, who are trying to like leap out to kill Damian, and they
Yeah.
all end up like
Yeah.
some of those scenes. The one guy who's like walking across the lighting rig over Damian's head, and that scene, I thought, okay, come on, like that's the worst way to try to sneak up on the Antichrist.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up these guys, because they are fucking like Keystone cops. They're just like bumbling idiots that have been tasked with killing the Antichrist to save the world. Like one guy just comes flying down from the rafters, like you just described, and gets set on fire. Then there's this other guy that he's like on a bridge, and I can't remember what happens, but he just gets like knocked off the bridge.
He's gonna charge at Damian on a horse, but the horse looks at Damian and like freaks out and like rears back, and he falls off the bridge. And then Damian sicks the dog on the other guy.
Right. That's probably my favorite part of how ridiculous it is with these guys, because it's just like a joke. It's like out of a comedy that these guys are so bad at assassinating the Antichrist. Like,
but I think that also does a really good job of showing how powerful Damian is at this point, where he is basically laughing off this challenge of these like priests that have the daggers that can kill him.
Yeah,
so it's like he does, and like you mentioned it earlier, he does have a legit fear in this movie. So it's also a Damian that is like in full control of his power, but also knows that he actually can be defeated.
Yeah.
So again, it comes back to Sam Neill. I think he does a really good job of conveying all of that.
Totally agree. So let's kind of like wrap this one up so we can kind of rank these. He finally does have his final conflict that they mentioned in the title here with Jesus. And I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on how this movie gets resolved. Like, did you kind of think it was a cop out? Did you think that it was like earned and it was a good ending? Because essentially what happens is, after he spent the movie trying to get rid of an infant that would have been Jesus reborn, Jesus comes back, but he's kind of just like a spirit almost, and he's a full-grown man. So it's not like, oh, you had to kill this infant that was going to grow up to be Jesus. It's like, no, he's there, and he doesn't kill Damien. There's this reporter in this movie, this British reporter that we've not talked about at all, but there's an interesting dynamic with her where she has a son. The son looks very much like Damien. I'm sure that like when they were setting up the marketing for this movie, they're like, oh, we need to have a kid, so that because there's like a kid in the other two, like this kid looks like Damien. So let's make sure that, and essentially he's going to be like Damien's, right hand man eventually, or like his main disciple, and Damien is like training him to be his number one. But his mom is the one that kills Damien. Like everyone tries to stab Damien with these daggers of Megiddo. She finally is able to stab him in the back and get him. And then Jesus is just basically there when he dies. Like, what did you think of that sequence?
I interpreted this as that the woman with the iron, that her son was the Nazarene.
Oh, okay.
Because Damien makes the point that his right hand man's son is the last child.
Okay.
So I kind of took it that they kill the Nazarene, but then maybe like Jesus, he comes back, and now that Damien's been stabbed, like Jesus can once again, be alive on earth, or come back and be a guiding light for the world again. I do think it is a polarizing ending, but like the fact that like you literally do see Jesus come like out of the a beam of light in the sky. There's Jesus over the dead body of the antichrist, and then there's like a Bible quote, and it's like roll credits, and you're like, whoa, okay.
Yes.
Like we went there.
Yes.
Right.
And that's, I think, one thing that makes this movie kind of stand out above other horror movies. We have this Jerry Goldsmith score. Jerry Goldsmith has made some of the most epic grand scores ever, often with like Star Trek movies, where there's like conveying that sense of wonder, that epicness. And obviously you have that sort of that ominous, dark Omen music that's like, oh, someone's gonna get killed in a gruesome way. But then the inverse of that in this movie in particular, like when they have that sequence where the scientists are mapping out the alignment of the stars, and then when they have Jesus return at the end, it's like this epic, fucking amazing music when it happens. It's a real crescendo of an ending, and I guess it just kind of all boils down to, are you satisfied with that ending? I guess like I personally like the idea of the Antichrist being thwarted versus like reigning and winning. What do you think?
I think that they wanted, based on the title, they wanted this to be the final Omen movie. I mean, it is effectively, the Omen 4 was a TV movie that came out a decade later. And then there really hasn't been like the first Omen is a prequel, and they did a remake. So they haven't, aside from the TV movie, they have not made a theatrical sequel to this. So this, like the Damien story ends in this movie.
Yeah.
So I do kind of like that it's a it's very similar to Exorcist 3, where the Gemini killer, or Father Karras, his story kind of comes to an end at the end of that movie, and you feel like, okay, now we can move on, and if we're going to do something else, it's got to be something different.
Right. Hey, really good point. Yeah. So, I mean, I saw the 2006 remake. I think I saw it on HBO like maybe a year after it came out. That's the last time I saw that remake. I've not seen the first Omen, which is the movie that came. That's hard talking about that movie because it's like, are you talking about the one from 1976, or I'm talking about the first Omen 2024? I have not seen that. And then I started Omen for The Awakening, but I haven't finished it. So I was thinking, Danny, that unless you had anything else you want to say about these two sequels, we could go ahead and just rank the series. Cool.
Yep.
Okay, why don't I go first since you've seen all of them. But for me, if I was just ranking this trilogy alone, I would rank them in order of release. The first one is the best. The second one, I think, is the second one and the third one, I think, are pretty neck and neck. But I think that once we get to the point of like, oh, this is Jesus versus Damian, it's like they've set the stakes so high and they can't really reach that true level. I feel like kind of when Jesus shows up at the end, it's almost like too easy, or it's like a cop out, whereas you need like some kind of thing on like an epic scale to be this true final conflict. But as far as like the way that Damien is portrayed, the side characters, the music. I think it's still an excellent film, but I would rank it like 1, 2, 3. Now, as far as the remake goes, I think I would actually make the remake be my fourth. So it would be like least favorite is the remake, then 3, 2, 1, and number one is my favorite.
Yeah.
But the only reason why the remake is so low is because it's just basically like a retelling of the original. And I really like the idea that this is like a consistent story with 3 different chapters. I really
Yeah.
eat that shit up. Go ahead.
I mentioned in my short review of the Omen 2006 that the champions of that movie were the marketers who were like, hey guys, it's 2006. We can make an Omen remake and get it out on June 6, 2006, and it sells itself.
Right.
And it feels the 2006 Omen movie might as well be Gus Van Sant's Psycho. It is so much of a carbon copy remake that it kind of makes the movie as you're watching it. Oh God, I feel a sneeze coming. Especially if you are as big a fan of the original as I am, it kind of makes that movie feel pointless, which stinks because I think it has an amazing cast. I think they casted that movie so well, and I just don't think they gave the actors enough to do to separate it out. So I'll do my ranking. I'll rank them from worst to best. I don't think it's going to be a shock what my number one is going to be. I would put the Omen 4 last. I don't think it's bad, but I also don't think it's great. It's a TV movie, so obviously the gore, the cool deaths that we were talking about, final death. There are some Final Destination deaths in that movie, but they're very muted because of the TV movie aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. So I would put that at number 4. It also basically, I feel like if the term woke was around in 1991, the people who misuse it today would have been like, oh, they gender swap Damian. Oh my, now we can't even have a male antichrist. Because in all honesty, it feels very much like a remake of the original, just with girl Damien, instead of it being a sequel in the franchise.
Sure.
Next, I would put the remake for the reasons I just stated. Great cast, wasted, feels like a total rehash of the original with not enough new stuff that make it worthwhile. And then we have the other 4 movies, which are the original trilogy and the first Omen. And
yes,
I really like all these movies. I'm going to put Damien Omen 2 next.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And then the final conflict in third place.
Okay.
And the only reason that I swap them is because, and I think it has to do with our conversation, actually. I just think the final conflict is a more interesting movie.
Okay.
And I love those monologues that he gives to the Jesus statue and to his cult of followers. The Omen 2 is really good, but it does kind of feel like generic horror sequel. We're going to up the body count. We're going to, slasher movie style. Whereas the final conflict is a little more interesting. Number 2 is the first Omen, and maybe it's recency bias. But I think there's an argument that could be made that this is one of the best or the best horror prequel. I think like that would be like a list I would have to look up. Like Ouija Origin of Evil by Mike Flanagan comes to mind as one of the best ones. Prometheus is a prequel, I guess. but I don't think it's as as good to its franchise as the first Omen is.
Okay.
What I love about the first Omen is that it's like a legacy prequel. It gives you those things that you want to see if you're a fan of the original movie. It gives you those nods. There's some like deaths that are gonna go, oh, okay, that reminds me of this. But it's also original, has great acting. Nell Tiger Free has a scene in that movie. We covered Possession. There's a scene that she has that reminds me of Isabella Gianni in Possession in the train station.
Oh my
Like,
God.
yeah, where you're
Yeah.
like, oh shit, like she's doing it right now. Like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
And then of course, I mean, it's the original. One of my all-time favorite horror films. So, Omen 4, uh, Omen remake, Damien Omen 2, Final Conflict, First Omen, and the original First Omen from 1976 is my number one.
Okay. You know, it's funny because I anticipated this conversation today and I kind of thought it would be something like that. I didn't know where you were going to rank this new one, but I thought it would be kind of similar to that. It's kind of funny because I always use these tickers on the bottom of our screen to say like what we're talking about. And it's either a combination of like lack of sleep or just being so engrossed in our conversation that I just basically left it on the Omen 2 for our whole discussion. Yeah, finally we ranked all 6. Because there's 6 Omen movies at this point. I really want to watch
an appropriate number.
Exactly. I obviously really want to see the first Omen in the theater, but I do want to finish Omen 4. I like what you said about it. One thing I wanted to point out, it felt off watching it, and I think it's because like when you watch the 3 Omen movies in the original trilogy, there's almost like this kind of like succession level of like wealth and grandeur. And they obviously can't repeat that in a made for TV movie. So, like the family in it, at least the beginning of Omen 4, they just feel like kind of wealthy, middle class, or like kind of upper class. They don't feel like, super rich like the Thorne family.
Yeah, there is it's definitely worth finishing though. I think his name is Michael Lerner. He's the guy who played like fake Roger Ebert in Godzilla.
Okay.
But he's an actor that you'll recognize instantly. He plays a private detective who comes in later in the movie. He is great. He like steals the movie, and he's got a couple of scenes. There is some creepy stuff that goes on with his character later on. So it's definitely worth finishing. Like, that's the thing. Like, I don't think there is a stinker in this franchise. Like, the made for TV movie for me is the lowest ranked movie. The remake just feels too similar to the original. Whereas like The Exorcist has the fucking Exorcist 2. Old like Halloween has many awful sequels. Friday the 13th has awful sequels. Nightmare on Elm Street has terrible sequels. I don't think there's a terrible Omen movie. And I think that, having just revisited the whole franchise, I think it's a franchise that kind of moves up my franchise ranking a little bit. When I think about like how would I rank horror franchises? I think The Omen kind of moves up that, because I don't know if you ever saw, there was a very short-lived, I think it only made it 1 season, Damian series.
Oh, I didn't know that. No.
Oh yeah, it was pretty good. I was reviewing it for Geeks of Doom at the time.
Okay.
It was pretty good. It only lasted, I think, 1 season, but I enjoyed it. If you have time, like if you could, I don't even know where that would be streaming, but that could be something we end up talking about. But yeah, I really like this franchise.
Hell yeah. I mean, it's fucking great, and that's one of my favorite things about this channel is just sort of uncovering these movies that aren't talked about. You go on social media and everyone's always talking about the same movies over and over and over again, same franchises, same installments in a franchise. This movie doesn't really get talked about that much, but you have always been an advocate for this series. And so I'm glad that I finally checked it out and got a chance to discuss it with you. So with that being said, what else is on the channel? If people are going to come on to the Laster Cast, if they're going to subscribe and they're going to like a bunch of our videos, what can they like?
I mean, they're going to see a lot of Omen shorts, but currently, aside from the Omen franchise, I have short reviews of Late Night with the Devil and Immaculate, which, by the way, if you compare Immaculate and the first Omen, those movies are very similar to each other, and they are in theaters at the same time. And it is a bad week for the Catholic Church if those two movies are in theaters at the same time, because they are both really good, like nunsploitation, like the church's evil horror movies. And so I have short reviews of Immaculate, Late Night with the Devil. And you know, if you go back a tiny bit, we were covering Argento movies. And so yeah, the Omen has been a nice little detour for the last couple of days.
Yeah. And you know, I think we were talking about maybe covering Monkey Man at one point. Maybe we could review that. I would definitely go back on the Argento train and cover Inferno with you. So we have some fun stuff. But of course, if you guys ever have recommendations too, Danny and I will check out your stuff. But I just want to say thank you so much to you guys for watching. Check out those Omen movies if you get a chance. And we will talk to y'all real soon.